In this Unity tutorial, I'm going to go over using the terrain tool of Unity 2018.3. I'm also opening up my Unity program using Unity Hub instead of the usual link. And the hub basically has these three tabs here. One, projects, where I can see my projects, and this other one, installs, which can show me the latest installs and also any beta releases that are available. All right, so I'm going to start a new project. And another feature of the Unity Hub is that I could pick my version of Unity that I want to make a new project in. I only have one version right now. All right, so I'm going to call this project Terrain. And this is where it's going to go. It's going to be a 3D project. And create project. Within a couple of moments, Unity opens up with a sample scene with a camera and a light. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a terrain. So I select the highest level here, sample scene, and I say game object, 3D object, terrain. And a terrain adds into my scene. Here in my scene view, I can see it. We'll click on the terrain. Its view here. Notice down here at the corner, there's something called baking ETA. This will continually be happening through my project for the terrain. It's kind of basically recalculating some bake lighting settings every time I do any changes to the terrain. It kind of really could slow things down. So there's two ways I could stop this. That baking ETA is only going to happen on a static object, so I could make my terrain unstatic for a moment and then the baking will turn off. So that's a quick way. And another way I could do it is by going into the settings for rendering, lighting settings, and down at the bottom there's this click here called auto generate. Automatically generate lighting data in the scene when any changes are made to the lighting systems. If I uncheck this, then everything in the scene will turn off the auto baking. So I could do it like this, and everything in my scene will be turned off for auto baking, or I could do it by clicking right here for the static terrain to make it non-static for a moment, and then baking will turn off. So I have one terrain in here, and I have it turned off like this, and I think I forgot what I just did over here. Let me just check it again. Light settings. I'll turn it off over here too. I could turn them back on after I finish creating my scene when I'm ready to use it in my actual game. But right now I want things to go fast. So here's my terrain. And with the terrain selected, in the inspector window I could see the terrain only now has 4 buttons. It only has 4 buttons, and I said to myself, that looks like less functionality. I thought there would be more. But there is more functionality. It's just things are organized differently. So everything about painting on the terrain here is organized under this paintbrush. And I can see my first setting here is called paint texture. But if I open up the drop down, I could see there are several things here. So paint texture is a way that I could paint a texture onto the terrain. So I'm going to use the paint texture setting from the drop down, and I'm going to have to add a layer. So the first thing I'll do is I create my first layer, and I don't have any images right now to paint with. So I'll just open up my browser and I'll look for something on the internet. Grass, texture, perhaps, and seamless would be nice. And I can see I have a couple of images, and I could also narrow my search down to just images by clicking on that. And I can pick a grass texture here that I'd want to use on my terrain. So maybe I decide to pick this one. I'm just waiting for it to load in. Okay, now I'm going to right click and save the image to my desktop of my computer, where it's easy for me to find it. And I'll say save. And here it is. And then I could take that, drag and drop it into my project, and now it's a file in my project. Now I'm going to want to paint some other textures here, and I can go ahead and look for something else, maybe a rock texture, images, something that I could use for the mountains that I'm going to make in my scene. And, this looks fine. It's pretty bumpy. Or this one. There we go. So I'll right click, save that to my desktop just so I can find it easily. Save. There we go with the rocks. I could drag that into my Unity project. Now here I have it. And maybe one more texture just because I feel like being creative. I'll do a dirt texture. Just so I could have some variation in color. And here we go. Maybe I'll just try this one right here. And I'll save that image to my desktop. Save. And there you go. And then I'll drag and drop it. Okay, bye-bye browser. Now I have my 3 textures. Now when I say edit terrain, paint texture, I'll click the edit terrain layers button and create my first layer. And I think by default I'll use the dirt. So now you can see for the first layer that I add, it basically paints dirt throughout the entire scene. Okay, that's for the first texture that I add. Now if I add any other textures, let's see, let me open this up a little bigger here. There we go. Create another layer, and with this layer I could do some grass maybe. Now if I select the grass, and you can see I have a brush. This is one of the other differences of the Unity 2018.3 terrain system. The brush actually takes the shape of the brush I have selected. So let's say I pick this one. And now I could go ahead and paint some grass in here mixed in with the dirt. And I'm very zoomed up high, but you can see as I get closer that that is a grass texture drawn on with the dirt. And I could control, as you see, the opacity and the brush size. So I could reduce the brush size down. And that's another thing too. Here in the new Unity 2018.3 texture thing, the brush size can get really large. I mean, this is a brush that's almost the size of the entire terrain. And with the opacity, I can control just how much the grass affects when I press. Or I could turn it up to the max, which means when I press it once, the grass will be at full opacity. And I have one more texture here, but I'm going to use that one when I start putting in some mountains. So now I'm still on the paintbrush tool, but from the drop down, I'm going to pick razor lower terrain. And this is a way to actually make some mountains. All right, so mountains are usually bigger, so I'm going to really increase the brush size here. And I want to have the mountains go up slowly, so I'll bring down the opacity. And here I could basically keep rubbing on the terrain, and I'm going to kind of have a nice big cresting mountains here. Okay. And I could use different shapes. I could use this one, which is just a plain old circle. And I could just kind of raise up some hills over here. And other than raising up the terrain, when I click with the mouse, I could also lower the terrain. All I have to do is hold down the Shift key, and with the Shift key held down on the keyboard, when I press, the terrain goes down instead of up. Okay, so now I have some mountains. Let's go back to the paint texture, and let me create another layer here with my rock texture and pick the rocks. And I'll help my mountains look a little better by, I'll draw some rocks on them. Okay, this is all like really quick. If I really wanted to get nice accurate, I could like zoom in really close and be more specific, but I'm just kind of going loose and wild here. And say these are some really odd shaped rocks, but there you go. So we did, let's see, in the paintbrush tool, we did razor lower terrain and we did paint texture. Now there's, I should have started with set height. Set height is basically a way that when you add the terrain, it starts off at the height of 0. So I could just Say if I wanted to start with the terrain in the middle instead of at 0, I could actually raise the whole terrain up to a certain height, maybe like 10, and then I say flatten, and the whole terrain goes to level 10. Okay? So let's say I started with that. I started with the set height, and then I go to the raise or lower terrain. Now I actually could use the shift key and lower something, you see? Or I could use the non-shift key and raise something since I'm not at 0 to start off with. And let me just put my mountains back over here. Oh yes, I want the brush to be bigger. Bigger brush. Boom. It's Mount Doom over here. Okay, just keep that mountain's going up there. And ooh, let me just put some hills and stuff back there. Come on, brush, get a little smaller. Oh, now for the third tool I have for editing. Here, there was a raise and lower terrain, the paint texture, the set height, the smooth height. Let's say smooth height works like this. Let me pick something here, like these bumps. All right, and let me set the opacity a little higher. Let's say I was over here and I just made these bumps in there. As you can see, they're really kind of shrill. They're really sharp edges, like, you know, that you can get gashed on. Okay, so let's say I wanted them to be a little bit smoother. I wanted to smooth it out. So over here I could pick the smooth height, and let me pick a smoother brush. And if I rub over with smooth height, it almost looks like it's melting, and it has a softer look to it. And the same thing, I could increase the size of the brush or the strength of the smoothing and really kind of melt down those sharp mountains to something smoother. And I guess sometimes I use smooth height when I want to have an area that I could actually walk through. Okay, now what else do we have? There's one more thing. Here's a new tool. The stamp terrain tool is one where I could take a brush shape, whatever shape it is, and I could set the stamp height to whatever I want. And then I could preview the stamp height if I were to press in there and have that, boom, a star just stamp in right at the height of 32. And let me undo that. And let me just do a stamp height of 15, because I know I put the whole height of my thing at 12. And there I could go. I could stamp a shape that I want to in there, whatever shape I want to, into the terrain. Okay, with one press instead of rubbing. And let's see what happens if I press the shift. It still goes up. If I press control, yeah, it just keeps stamping and going higher. All right, and along with this new stamp height tool, we've always had these brushes here, but you could also create your own brush from any image that you may, draw or create. And I don't have any, but that's a new thing. So you could have brushes that aren't there in the first place. What's one other thing I could show you? There's, before we go off the paintbrush, there is one other new tool called Create Neighbor Terrains. All right, so if I select the Create Neighbor Terrains and I go onto my terrain here, these 4 white boxes are neighboring terrains. All right, so what I could do is just click and it automatically creates neighboring terrains in any boxes next to that first terrain that I have. And then over here you could see that these are the new terrains, and I could remove them if I want by pressing delete, select, and press delete, select, and press delete. So let's say I added a terrain over here. Okay, I just added another one, sorry. So say I added a terrain right here. I want to zoom in on it, and on this terrain I want to still raise and lower the terrain. So here's the part that's important, is that with the terrain neighbor tool, if I were to add some mountains, they could continuously go through from one side to the other. I don't have to put the thing together and match it up. So it's basically extending the terrain tool to make a bigger area without me having to worry about the placement and everything. So the 2 new tools here is Create Neighbor Terrain and Stamp Terrain, and the new brush tool. So that's the paintbrush. Let's see what happens on our second button here. Oh, you know what? When I added the second terrain, it's static. You see right here, and I want to make sure. I know I turned off my baking ETA from the first terrain. See, it's not static, but the new terrain came in, and it had the static thing checked. So in case I didn't do it by the window, the baking ETA would have come back on. But I've done it from my window um, light settings here. I unchecked this box here. So my terrains, I could turn them back on static. So there we go. All right, anyway, so the baking ETA thing is still not going on, and that's what I want while I'm working. Let's see what the next button here is. It's called the Paint Trees button. And this is going to enable us to actually add some three-dimensional trees into here, or basically any kind of 3D thing. And then when we paint, it's going to paint those trees onto the scene. All right, so let's see if I have any trees to add right now. If I go to add a tree, and I don't have any assets that are trees right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some assets. I'm going to go to the asset store. So from window, asset store, it opens up this asset store window. And by default, right now it's docked into my little window. I'm not seeing all the options I want to see. I'm just going to drag it out so it's on its own. And then I'll just make it a little wider. And now I'm going to type in speed trees. This is a certain type of tree package that used to be in Unity, but now they kind of like, I guess, removed it and you have to download it separately. Anyway, so I have the Speedtree package, and we can see there's assets here that cost money. Let me open this window up a little bit more. Okay, there you go. I was looking for this. When the window is wide enough, you actually could see this thing here for the price. And I'm just going to look for the free stuff because, you know, Omar Vision's all about free. And here it is. This is the package I'm looking for, the Speedtree package. And it has basically 3 trees with also a version of the broadleaf tree for mobile. So I'm going to say I'm gonna press the red button over here. Mine says import. Yours may say download. But I had downloaded this before onto my computer, so now it just says import to import it into my project. These are the files for the Speedtree package, and I'm gonna say import right here on this button now. And this will add it to my project. Okay, just give it a moment. Okay, when it finishes importing, that window will go away, and I can close my asset window. And here it is. This is the Speedtree package. It just put it right here in my assets folder. All right, and here it also, you can see it right here. So anyway, now I'll go back to my terrain and I will say edit trees, add tree. And now when I click here, I actually have some trees I could add. Okay, so you could see it even here in the window. There's the desktop version of 3 trees. These are very nice, highly detailed. And then there's also a lower detail version for mobile. I'm on my desktop, so I'm going to add this broadleaf desktop tree. Press add, and it will show up right here. This is my first tree I'm adding. Now let's see what we have here for settings for when we draw the trees onto the scene. Let me get in a little closer. I have the brush size. Okay, I'm going to make mine go up a little higher. And then I also have this other setting called density. I'm going to turn it down, way down over here. So now in this circular area, if I click, it's going to add some trees. All right, my density is low, it's at 15. And if I want to, I could increase the density. And then when I click, there's more trees that add for my press. Okay, so let's see, I kind of added too many over here. The forest just got way too thick. I could also, instead of just clicking with my mouse to add, I could hold down the shift key and clear out some trees if I added some too many in an area. So that's one way I could add trees, is I could paint them in. There's this other button here called Mass Place Trees. If I click on that, there's a little tool to randomly place trees throughout at least one of the terrains that I have selected. I have my first one here, not the neighbor. And it has a number of trees that it could add. I'm just going to put that down to 1,000 instead of 10,000. And I could say to keep the existing trees here or not. I'm just going to say not to keep the existing trees. And then I say place. And then it will randomly place trees throughout my scene of the amount of trees that I said. The only thing is it kind of works to only place them on this terrain, the one I have selected. So I could erase them with the shift key and go around like that if I wanted to, or I could just clear the whole thing by saying mass place trees 0 and uncheck keep existing trees and press place, and that could remove all the trees. So okay, let me just go back over here and say mass place trees, and I'm gonna mass place, let's say 100 trees, and say place. There you go. And now let's try adding up more trees. I'm gonna add another tree and click here. So first I tried the broadleaf. Let's try the conifer. So I'll double click and add the conifer. And now I have 2 trees I could pick from. So I picked the tree that I want to draw with. I'm going to try the conifer now. And I could use the brush, which I'm going to make a little bigger and turn down this density. And I could draw some conifer trees. There. Now let's say you're drawing a tree. There's other settings here, like the tree height. And the tree height could be random from a minimum to a maximum value. And you could also, as the random tree height goes up and down, there's the the width and the height of the tree. They could be locked together so the tree stays in the same scale as it goes bigger and smaller, or you could uncheck that and they could go in by themselves. And also here there's random tree rotation, so the tree's not always drawing at the same angle. It could, it could be turned around. So these are some settings for the trees, and this is how you add the trees by just clicking. Okay, and let's see how those look up close. Just get in there. You can see the detail of the speed trees is really great, and you can see that my computer is still moving really fast. So these trees look really great, and the computer still moves really fast. So that's the second button for adding trees. Now there's a third button over here, and this one's called Paint Details. So paint details is what I'm going to use to make grass that is going to be blowing in the wind. So let's go maybe over here, and maybe in this green patch area, in this area here, I plan to add some grass. So the first thing I have to do is I have to click this Edit Details button. I have to get a couple of different details that I'm going to draw in. So I said Edit Details, and I could add a grass texture or a detail mesh. So I'm going to use grass. I'm going to add a grass texture, and you can see here it's looking for me to supply it with a texture of grass, a picture of grass. Now the picture of grass that it's looking for, it's going to be a picture of grass from the side view. So right now I have a picture of grass here, but it's like from the top view down. That's okay. Let's go to the internet and let's type in side view grass. All right, and let's see what we get. Okay, so here we go. These are some side views of grass. Let's just limit this to just images, and we're going to see what we have. So we're going to look through, and things like this look okay except for these words here. This one also has words on the side, but this clump of grass looks just perfect for what we want. This one too. But as you're looking through and you're trying to find the grass, you basically want to find something where the background is transparent. And I kind of already found one that has a transparent background. That's this right here. So I'm just going to drag and drop that into my scene. All right, so right here you may not see the grass is transparent. That's because the type of texture type is default, but if I did say sprite as the texture type, apply. Come on. And there you can see the transparency finally showing through. But whether I changed it to a sprite or not, even if I left it as default, okay, it's going to go through and do that again. This is a pretty big picture. It's 2048 pixels by 1875 pixels, so that may be why it's taking a little while to switch. But I'm leaving it as default when I brought it in. I'm going to go to the terrain over here again, and make sure I have my paint details selected and edit details. I'm going to say add grass texture. And over here, I'll pick my texture and I should be able to scroll and find my grass right here. So I'm going to pick that. Now, what these settings are is the grass texture. This is just saying the size of the grass texture, the grass when it's drawing it on the terrain. I'll play with those settings if I notice my grass is too big or too small. And these other settings here are to help the grass look more lifelike by having the grass um, have some random variations between this color and this color. Anyway, so main thing is I came to this add grass texture window and I added a texture. So now I press add, and now here it shows up. Here's one grass texture that I added. Now if I have that selected, I can go over here and I'll be using my brush. So let me pick a brush shape, and maybe I will pick a different brush shape, something round. There we go. And the same thing. The brush has a size and opacity, but then down below here, there's the details section, and the details section has a brush size, opacity, and strength. So let's see what the grass draws like with these settings for the grass. I'm just going to click with the mouse, and you can see it's very few blades of grass getting drawn in when I click. So let's see what happens when I increase the opacity. And now you can see the opacity controls just how many blades of grass draw in, all right? And the terrain is only going to draw, you have to get close. The terrain is only going to actually render the grass blades that I'm saying to put in if I am close enough to the terrain. So you see as I'm zooming out how the grass doesn't display itself. So if I were this far out trying to draw my grass and you don't see anything when you're drawing it, just try zooming in close enough so that you could see the grass texture. See, now when you look real close, there's the grass texture. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my camera and I'll press Control Shift F. And now I'll have my game view. The camera's going to match up, okay? Remember, I select the camera and press Control Shift F. Or I could just go over here to Game Object and say Align with View. And you see this is where I got Control Shift F from. So the game view is matched up with this. So now I'm going to press play and I'm going to show you something that Unity is going to do to the grass for us. When I press play, look at the grass. It's automatically moving in the wind, which is a nice realistic effect added automatically by Unity for us. Okay, so let me press stop. And let me go back and select my terrain. So you've noticed that I've drawn some grass in and we were able to erase the trees. Can we do the same thing for grass? Yes, we can. Let me just reduce the brush size a little, and now I could hold down the control key and kind of erase grass if I put some in that I didn't want to go in, and so I don't have to start all over again. I could just use the control key and erase grass if I wanted to. Okay? So that's grass. The other detail that we had here was a detail mesh. So let's see if I say add detail mesh, and here it's looking for a detail. It's actually looking for a mesh and not a texture. So for this, I'm going to have to download, I'm going to add some rocks with this method, like some little pebbles and stones throughout the scene. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the asset store again, window, asset store, and it just came in docked again. I'm going to undock it and make the window bigger. And the reason I'm doing the undocking and making it bigger is so I could see the actual rocks, maybe stones. I think stones means like something smaller. And then I just have to go to free, okay, and say apply. I can already see something right here. These here, let me just press the quick look. And this is 4.7 megs. That's good size, not too big. I'm going to download these. And then I'm going to import them. And these are the files, and then I say import. And here they come. There's the free. That's the folder right there. So I could close my asset store window because here's the rocks right here. And I should be able to see them here somewhere. Yep, here's the stones right in the mesh folder. Anyway, so let me go back up to my assets folder now that I have some stones in my project. And let me pick terrain and make sure I had the paint details button. And now I'm going to edit details and add a detail mesh. So now I should be able to pick from, it's not in my scene yet, but in my assets, I have some stones. Okay, and I like this little round stone, so I'm going to select it, double click on it. And the render mode is not grass. The render mode is going to be a vertex lit. Okay, and then the colors, I don't want the colors, I don't want my stone to be the color of the grass. I want the lighting on it to be, white and maybe a little bit of sunlight. And that's what I want. So I'm going to change those. Now I see what my size is, and let's see how that works for the size. I'm going to say add. And right here you can see the stone. So let me select the stone. And then I'm going to go in here and let me draw some stones with a bigger brush here in the details brush one. There we go. Let's see what happens. If I click, this is great. I get some little stones. So that's nice. And I guess I could control the density of them with the opacity. All right, so if I want the stones to be more spread out, I could just use the opacity key and have the stones spread out, and I'm just adding some stones. And the same thing, if I want to erase some of them because I added too many, I could just hold down the control key and erase some stones if I want to. Okay, so now you can see I have some grass, I have some stones over here, I have some trees. What else could I possibly want? What else could I do? Well, let's see right now if we are able to add a player in here so we could walk around and actually see what this looks like. All right, so let me just save what I have, save my sample scene, and I'm going to add in something that I could walk around the game with. I'm going to add in an object, just a capsule shape, and here he is. He's really small. If I double click on him, I go bring him in the view, and I see that he is under the ground. So with the capsule selected, let me just change the height to 10. And now let's see. Now he's just about coming out the ground. So just a little bit higher. And there he is. He's above the ground. Okay. And there we go. Let's see him from the sunny side. So Z is facing forward, and X is left and right, and Y is the top of his head. So one thing we're going to do is we're going to take our character, and since we want to see the world through this character's eyes, I'm going to make the camera a child of the capsule. Okay. And right now the camera is still where it was from when I placed it over here. That's okay. I'm going to make a script that takes the camera and puts it inside him and looks out. Okay. So now we could change the name of this to player. And let me just save it again. And then with the player selected, he has a capsule collider. Let's add a rigid body so that he kind of like always walks on the floor and drops to the floor. Okay, I got a collider and rigid body. And now if I press play, let's make the camera look from this angle. So Control Shift F. All right, and then let me just pick up the player a little bit here. And I want to show you with the rigid body, if I press play, he's going to drop down and he should land on the ground. Boom. Okay, good. So let's add the script, add component, so we could control them, and I'll just call the script player. All right, and let's open up the script in Visual Studio. And Visual Studio is open. I am going to type in the whole script, but I'm not going to bore you with having to see me type it in slowly. I'm just going to actually use the magic of pause. And there you go. The script is magically typed in. So what I want you to notice here is these are the using statements that are including more code that's not here in the script that we could use in our script. And these two are kind of like slightly grayed out, systems collection and systems collection generic. When Visual Studio slightly grays out these using statements, that means there's nothing in my code that's actually using anything from these two using statements. So I don't actually need to have them here. I'm going to delete them, all right, just for efficiency. But I do need Unity Engine. As you can see, it's highlighted in white. Now, the player, public class player, this is the name of my script, player. The name of the script file and the name of my class, they have to match for Unity, all right? And player is derived off of monobehavior, which is a type that is for all the game objects that we have in here. So I'm getting some functionality from monobehavior. Here we have three public variables: move speed, look speed, and jump force. So move speed is going to be how fast the player can move around. Look speed is going to be how fast when I move the mouse I look around. So the higher the number, the faster the looking goes. And jump force is going to be so we could jump. All right, and the bigger the force, the higher the jump is when I press the jump button. Now remember, we added the camera over here to be a child of the player so that we could see out of the player's eyes. So in the script, I have a pointer to manipulate the camera. So I have a variable that I could set equal to the camera. And then I also have a variable set equal to the rigid body that I'm going to use for jumping. All right, then I scroll down and I have my start function. The start function is called one time. So when I press play to start the game, the start function calls one time. So it's a great place to do any initialization. All right, so I initialize the RB to equal the rigid body of my game object. And this is how you do it. This is referring to my game object that I put the script on. That's the player. And get component rigid body is going to look over here in the inspector window, and it's looking for the rigid body component, and it gets a reference to that. Okay, so that's what RB is going to equal. Now what I do over here, you don't have to do this, but I set the angular drag, I set it to about 10. And this is because I noticed if I didn't have any angular drag and I hit something, my player would start spinning around all by himself. But with adding drag on, it keeps him from just spinning all by himself if I hit something. The other thing I did was I added some constraints for the rigid body so my player doesn't fall over on his face. All right, if you look at my player, he has a very round shape at the bottom. The collider has a very round shape. As I'm going over the ground, I may hit a bump or something and fall over. It's not going to be said that I'm going to be able to balance. So what I do is on the rigid body, I make it that I can't fall over. And in the code, I set freeze rotation and X rotation. I set freeze rotation for X and for the Z axis. And in the code, like you just saw here, I set the angular drag so I don't go spinning around if I hit something. See, that's what these two lines are. Anyway, that sets up my rigid body. Now, I want to set up the camera. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I get a pointer to the camera. Now the camera, here's my player. The camera is not a component. No, so it's not in this list. But the camera is a child of the player. So here's the player and here's the camera as a child. So how do I get a reference to some child object? It's basically by using get component in children. So I use this is my player object, transform dot get component in children, and it looks for any component that's a camera. So I only have one component, and that one component is a camera. So the function will return that one camera, and now I have a pointer to this camera. Now I tell the camera, I move it from wherever it is in the scene, and I put the camera inside my player by setting the position of the camera to the position my player is. And then I also had the camera look in the same direction my player is looking by setting the rotation equal to my player's rotation. So you look over here, these arrows are saying like which way is in front. So my player is looking this way. So when the camera, which right now you could see is way over here, the position thing is going to put the camera inside my player, like right where his head is. And then the rotation is going to have the camera turn around and look that way. Okay, it's going to have the camera turn around. Let's see if I could do this right here with the rotation. It's going to have it turn and look the same way as my player. All right, and then the position thing is going to have it go and be inside my player's head. But it's going to do that with code, so I don't have to worry. We don't have to worry about that. So now I'm going to press, ooh, I didn't finish explaining. Sorry. So that's the start function and initializes the camera. This little line here is to hide the mouse cursor and lock it to the game screen. So the cursor is this little thing I'm moving around with right here. And I set the lock state to be locked. So that means right now, if you look around, I can move the cursor. What happens when I press play is I want the cursor to become only stuck in the game screen, and then I hide it from being shown. It's just what we do when we make a first-person controller. So that's it. I set up the rigid body, the camera, and I lock the cursor. That's what I did in the start function. In the update function, I want to, this is what happens as the game is playing. It gets called like 60 times a second. However many frames per second your game is playing, that's how many times the update function will be called. And in the update function, I want to read the controls from the user so they could control the player. So the first set of lines over here, these first set of commands in code, they're going to control the movement of the player in the X and the Z plane. So as you see here, the X and the Z, that's the red and the blue, that's moving around on the ground in forward or sideways. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read input, get axis, horizontal. All right, so the input is a special class from the Unity engine that reads any input that the user may have typed on the keyboard or with the mouse. That class is for reading any input from a user. So the input I want to read is this input for called input setting called horizontal. And the type of input is an axis. So that means the values kind of smoothly go from -1, 0 to 1. It goes from a negative number to 0 to a positive number. And when I say smoothly, it means like it goes from 1, -1, minus a half, 0. It's all the numbers in between. All right. And horizontal is a word that I got from the input manager. So if I go to here, project settings, and this is Unity 2018.3, so now all the settings, they're kind of like in this one panel. And I click input, then there's this input thing, and this is where horizontal is defined. See, there's where I got the word from. And right here with horizontal, it says that I can move with the left and the right key and the A and the D key. It also says it reads from the x-axis of any joystick. So that's great. And here's vertical. And there's some other words here that are commands. And that's where I'm getting the commands from for this input statement when I put a string. So that reads the horizontal input. You can press the A and the D or the left and the right arrows. And this reads from the vertical input, which is the WS or the up and down arrows, okay? Now that I have the value that the user has pressed in these two variables, horizontal and vertical, now I actually apply the value to my player. So I'm going to move the player, or I'm going to translate the player left and right on the right axis. That's the red arrow. That's the red arrow, okay? And how much do I move the player on that red arrow? I move it by the value of horizontal. So if the value is 0, I don't move. If it's -1, I move to the left. And if it's +1, I move to the right. But, moving by a speed of 1 is kind of slow. So I just multiply that by the move speed that the person put over here. And now I can move even faster. And then I just multiply it by time delta time. So everything moves smoothly, no matter how fast or slow your computer is. So that's how I move left and right. And then with this command, I move forward and backward, but I use the vertical command instead, the vertical input. Okay, so that's how these 4 lines control movement. Now over here, I'm going to control looking around with the mouse. Remember, the camera is inside my player, and I want to move the camera so I could look up, down, and everything, right? So for that, I'm deciding to use the axis of the mouse to control how I look around. So the mouse x-axis is if you take your mouse and you move it left and right on your mouse pad. Or the y-axis is if you move your mouse up and down on the mouse pad. So now instead of using the translate command like I did over here, I'm going to use a rotation command to rotate. So there's two different axes I want to move on. I want to move on the to look left and right, and to move left and right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my player left and right. So this transform local rotation, this is times equal. When I put a star and an equal sign, times equal. Now how much do I want to rotate the player? I want to rotate the player by an angle. So I use the mouse X to say which way, if it's a -1 or a +1. Then I use the look speed to say how many degrees do I rotate. And what did we set ours to by default? It's 90. See? So which way do I rotate? And then by the look speed is, how much. And then I always multiply by time delta time. And which axis do I rotate on? So if I want to turn left and right, it's like I have a pin that's going in the top of my head and I can only turn left and right. So the axis I rotate on to turn left and right is the up axis. See? Here's the up axis. This is like the pin that's going into the top of my head. And then I could just turn left and right. So that's how come I picked vector 3 up to turn left and right. Now, to look up and down, I'm going to actually make the camera turn up and down. That's attached to my head. And so I'll use mouse Y times the look speed, always multiply by time delta time, and I just use the axis, the left axis. Okay? So this is right, this is left, left and right, and up and down would be like going like this way, up and down. And that's how we get that. And then over here, if I press the jump button, if the jump button is true, then I use the rigid body and I add a force that jumps me into the air. And then gravity will just pull me back down. All right, so that's the code. I hope you got a chance to type it in. And just in case you didn't, I'm just going to scroll through it one more time. Here's the first part. Here's start. You can press pause. And here's the update function. So if you don't want to type it in, you can go to omarvision.com and you could download the code. But if you want to type it in, do that. So now I'm going to go back here. Oh, but always make sure that you don't have a little star. Make sure you save your file. Then you can go back to Unity, and Unity will have a little wheel that churns over here. When the wheel finishes churning, you could try pressing play. So I'm going to press play, and now I'm going to move around in my scene. Okay, so look, I could look up and down, left and right. And if I move forward, I could move and could walk through the tall grass, okay? And I could go through the shadows of these trees and walk through the mountains. And now let's try jumping. Oh yeah, I could just keep pressing the jump button over and over. It's almost like I'm flying. And then I land back on the ground. So this is cool. Make your world, walk around your world, and this is kind of like the start of a game when you think about it. There you go.